So the question today is, does your book need a doctor? Diana, welcome to Reality Coaching for Writers, where we offer what?
No fluff, just the real stuff you need to succeed.
Right, and this is a topic that can at times sound painful. So we're going to kind of jump in and talk about what a book doctor is and the difference between a book doctor and what, a developmental editor? Is that the other thing we're going to kind of cover? So why don't you give our audience an overview of what we're going to be talking about today?
Okay, so yes, there are no needles involved. Developmental editor is when we look at a project that, the writer has notes, they have journal entries, they have it's all over the place, and they just don't know how to get the book in its form so that a reader can take what they have. And so they need a developmental editor to kind of pull all those pieces together and suggest the changes, but the writer makes the changes themselves. Whereas a book doctor there's several levels. A book doctor will take all of that, get it in book form, and do it for a writer. And the first level would be that just get it all together and clean it up, do the content editing. And the second level is they actually do a little ghostwriting. So Eddie, what have you done some ghostwriting for any of your clients?
Yeah, I've got a couple of ghostwriting projects I'm working on now. Some novels. I don't know. I'm trying to think of, and I in the past actually made really good money, really good money before the Caden Chronicle series. Before I got into book publishing, I made really good money ghostwriting, and I don't know. I probably should have stayed with it for more to make more money. I could have done well, but anyway, I tell people all the time, I really don't care whether I'm writing for myself or writing for somebody else. I like writing. I just like writing. And so, whether my name's on the cover or somebody else's name, it doesn't make any difference to me. I've got projects of my own right now that some nonfiction stuff, scriptural stuff that, if I had a client who had a platform, who was a pastor, and we agreed on the doctrine, and I wanted to just give the pastor my manuscript and say, here you go, put your name on it if you like it. I'd be happy doing that because I just like the writing process. But I don't do very much editing for that very reason, because my problem is I just write, and I'm not really good at the editing and making suggestions because I've got pretty strong opinions, and so once I write something, that's kind of the way it is, So I'm much more of a book doctor.
I am too.
Yeah, I take the manuscript and kind of look at it and go, and the way I explain a book doctor is the patient, you are the patient. The book belongs to the author. It is their work. It is their work. It's not my work, it's their work. And I look at it as there's just a few things, hopefully just a few things that the manuscript needs work on. And, with my help, I can go in and move some things around, maybe change the structure of the story a little bit, change the wording a little bit, and just make it a better story. And it's still, and then I give it back to the author and say, but make sure it has your voice on it,
Right. Yeah.
I was thinking last week, I had a call last week with a potential client, and it was a novel based on life events. And it started out, like oftentimes happens, it was more backstory at the front of it. And so what I recommended is, like, let's just flip this around. Let's start with the inciting incident. Let's start with the funeral of the young daughter who's already committed suicide. Let's start that as the opening scene of the story. And then after we leave the funeral, through dialogue, the backstory is revealed of why she is in the grave now and what happened, and the backstory. And that, just that one comment, after the call, the author got it. He said, oh yeah, I can do that. Flipped it around, and he said it makes perfect sense. It reads better. It gets you into the story quicker. An editor can
Right.
do that, but if you give me the manuscript, that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to go grab, to your point, we're often talking about that chapter 3 or 4 where the story actually starts. Just go grab that chapter and drag it to the front, put it right there, and then we go. You and I, as doctors, we'll just go through it. You know, fix the things as we go along. So that's one way.
And my current work in progress is a nonfiction, and it's a couple transcripts of speaking engagements. And so it's definitely moving the content around because there's some repetition in content, because the gentleman spoke several times on the same subject, which is the subject of the book. And so I'm choosing what's out of combining all of the like content and then choosing where it goes in the development of the point that the author's trying to deliver, the promise. And so it is a lot of moving around.
Yeah, that is part of the. It's one of the advantages a book doctor has, and a content editor is going to kind of do the same thing. So even, and I'll just go ahead and put a shout out to content editors. Even after you had a book doctor go through it, you still need to have a general editor come in behind the author and the book doctor. And the reason is there's just going to be a lot of residue left over from the surgery. There just is, right? So if you want to think about it in an analogy, the general editor at that point becomes the rehab person, okay? The book doctor has done the operation. The patient is you, the original author with the manuscript. That's the patient. We're the doctor. But then after that, you got to get the patient back into living condition. And that's what a general editor is going to do after the book doctor.
Right.
And I say that because, to your point, the repetition, sometimes there's so much that a book doctor has to do that we can't catch it all. There's just, we can't catch it all. And we need another set of eyes to come in after us to go, okay, well, there's one more repetition that they got biased that we didn't clean up. Yeah, I'm thinking of a couple of projects I have worked on in the past where I got to the end of the book and I still wasn't really sure what the book was about. There were lots of chapters, and I've been working on it for so long, and I was like, I'm still not sure what the target audience is, what we're trying to reach for here. And part of it's probably because of repetition. There's so much repetition in there that I've lost focus of where each chapter hits with a hard bang, and I go, okay, I know what that's for. I know what that's for. I know what that's for. Yeah. So some of the things I don't spend a great deal of time on are the grammar. That's one of the things I'm not interested in. I'm more interested in the voice and the style of writing. And so we've talked about this before. One of the things that I, tell authors before they bring me on as a book doctor, I was like, well, one of the things you could probably save yourself some money on is rather than me do it, just look for the passive voice and go in and change that yourself. Look for all the words, how many times you use word just, because, so, as, while. Look for those words, flip the sequence around. If you do all that work early, then I can spend more time working on the structure of the book and adding some of the plot elements, especially if you're doing fiction, more of the plot elements that are missing.
Well, Eddie, that's a good point. There's a lot of ways that the author, as you said, just get rid of what's weed words and clean the document up as much as possible. And then the price on our end goes down for them. It's not as costly. So it depends on how much they want to be involved, but they can save themselves some money by doing some of that grunt work ahead of time and then putting it in our hands, because it will take us a lot less time. And it's like using a weed whacker. All of a sudden you see something, a feature in your backyard you hadn't seen before. And so we'll be able to spot those things because the weeds are out of the way. So that otherwise we have to first clear the weeds and then do the job.
And that is true. And I'll just go ahead and add, but sometimes we just want the landscape people to come in and whack the weeds and be done with it. And
Yeah, and I'm happy to do that. Yeah.
I reached that point this week when I sent my latest pirate novel off to the editor. I was like, you know what, just, you know, here are the things that I struggle with. These are my weak areas in my stories. I'm going to tell you that's what it is. Look for those, fix those, and fix anything else you want to fix. I don't care. I just don't care. Just clean the yard up and make it look pretty. That, you know, make it look good from the curb. Because at some point, all authors, we run into this where if I go back and look at it one more time, I'm going to get bogged down in all the weeds and I'll never get out. So just you give it to somebody else and let them go and fix it and be done with it.
Well, and Eddie, that brings up a good thing too, is you do want to establish a relationship with your editor as a writer, and you want them to, there's trust that builds, you know, and the editor you've been working with on your novels, you've been working with them for a period of time. So you trust them. Yeah. You trust them to say, go ahead, you know, take care of anything else you see. And so I think that's what's, I love working with repeat clients, because I can get in their head quickly because I know their voice and they trust me. So I'm not always explaining everything that I'm trying to do for them. And it's a joy, you know, to be able to continue to work with, you know, there are some people who I've worked with 4, 5, 6 books. And I always feel like a midwife, you know, that I've assisted in the birth. And I take as much joy in those book launches as the client does, because it's like the old shake and bake commercial, remember? And yeah. I helped.
That's right.
And I helped. So it's a joy-filled thing for us, you know, to be able to come alongside and help. But voice is it's so important. And it's important that you find someone you can trust with your voice.
Yeah, and the joy part for me is, I mean, I'm working on I'm helping doctor a book now, and the second chapter, this is a novel, it's a short novel, and the second chapter is inciting incident. All that happens in Act 1. Act 1, everything happens in the first chapter, and it's only 2,000 words. So the author has already done a great job of condensing down Act 1 and getting you right into the main part of the story. So chapter 2 is they're already in the new world. Characters already transitioned to the new world and all that, you know. And it didn't take a ton of work to improve chapter 2, and then it was just a matter of adding the element of what's the main problem in the scene, because there has to be a problem in the scene. If you don't have a problem in the scene, why are we here? You know, if there's no problem, we don't need to be here, right? And in this case, it was a status change. Where's the status change for the character now that she's in the new world, right? And it's easy enough for me to see that those two things were missing and go in and add them. I mean, it's just a couple of lines in the chapter, right? And that makes the chapter that much stronger. Now it makes perfect sense. Everything in that chapter works. Again, it's still a short chapter. I say that because for me, that's where the joy is. It's just like opening up a patient and going, oh, that needs to be fixed, and this needs to be fixed. Give me a clamp, give me a surgery, boom, 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 stitch it up. Okay, close and we're done. You know, that quickly. That's what I enjoy doing.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. So, as the patient, the writer gets to determine the level of involvement they want the editor to play, and it's important that you spell that out ahead of time, because we don't want to step on toes. We don't want to cross a boundary that we didn't know was a boundary. So have those conversations. Don't be afraid to ask questions, and have those conversations and say, well, you know, if you are in there, you know, get permission to do those things, make those changes. And of course, we send everything back so that they have a document that sees where we make changes. But I also like to send my clients a document with everything accepted.
Yeah, so we talked a little bit about, you made the point about reducing redundancy, and sometimes some of the things I run into, in addition to redundancy, is actually would be the opposite, which is lack of clarity. Sometimes we're really just not really sure what the author's trying to say. They may have said something similar multiple times, but we're still not sure what the main point is or what they're trying to say. Sometimes that's phrasing, that's simply a sentence structure phrasing, or sometimes it's actually the content itself. Still not really sure what somebody is trying to get across. Maybe I just did that in how I explained this, I'm not sure. But that's one of the things a book doctor will do. It does. I haven't run across it too many in my projects. Occasionally, Diane, I'll reread a paragraph over and over again, and I'm still sure I'm not sure what we're trying to say here. And usually what we're going to do is we're going to rewrite something so it's clear. But if we can't figure it out, then that's where a comment comes in. You put that into the document and go, I'm not sure. You must know something I don't know. You're saying something I don't get. And if I don't get it, maybe the reader's not going to get it as well. So that's a clarity issue. One of the other things that I tend to do is take words that seem like big words, because I write it, what I like to say, I write it at 8th grade level. Maybe it's a little bit more advanced than that, but I make the assumption that a lot of our readers, a lot of the people that read books and read what we write, are not academia. They don't have letters after their names. They may have gone to college, but that may have been all the education they had. So these $5 words that we'll see in a manuscript, I'll go and take the word and look it up and see what the thesaurus says, and see if we can find a better word that basically means the same thing. That's one of the things we'll do.
Yeah, that's a very good point. That's a very good point. When you talk about clarity,
go ahead.
when you talked about clarity and redundancies, and making things clear, I also have seen the benefit of a good outline. One of the things I'm learning to do is ask for an outline, and then if there isn't one, I create one, a minute one. Now I'm talking about working with nonfiction, right. So I know the promise of the book, and I go with the current manuscript and I make a minute outline, just every little bit, subtitles, thoughts underneath, bigger thoughts, and I break it down, and that helps me so much, especially like say there's betrayal. I'll do a Google search, a word search on betrayal within the document, and then it will show me every time it's addressed. And then I can make a note of that, and then I can go back and choose what parts of all those are worth putting into one paragraph about betrayal. And that outline really serves me well. I've found that if I do that right at the outset, and if I've actually helped train some of my clients to deliver me an outline, and it just helps me a whole lot, because sometimes the outline I make, I think, oh my goodness, we really have to do some reordering here. But it helps. It's easy for me to go in then and see, trust. The word trust comes up. Okay, let me look at all the times the writer has mentioned trust, and where do I want to take that, and where do I want to move it to, and where is it best in the scheme of the whole, sequential development of their thought.
Yeah, you're braver than I am, and you have more time. I get projects and they'll say kind of the same thing, and I'll say, "Where's the outline?" Well, I don't have an outline. We'll figure it out as we go along, and we can do that, right? We could, But sometimes they'll say, just, create one for me. And my response is, that's going to require me to read this manuscript, right? And if it's 60 or 80,000 words, we're probably talking about 3 months before I can get back to you with the outline, because I don't read projects. I don't go through and read them just for leisure, just to get the big picture, because that's a lot of time. Yeah, that's a ton of time.
Yeah.
So you just paid me, almost $1,000 to read your book, right? That's going to be
Exactly
blown up when we're done. So I'm going to read it, and then we're going to blow it up, and you've given me that money for, just to do something that you should do. So what I do with authors is I say, you give me a 2-sentence description of what each chapter is supposed to be. And that's going to be our target, because you wrote it, right? And, if this sounds cool, I hate to be that way, but you wrote the book. So in theory, you should know what the book's about. So give me a 2-sentence. And if they won't do that, Diana, then we just plod through, and we're going to, at the end of it, come back and go, this is what it is. We thought we had an orange. We got a banana. We just got a banana. That's what we have over here. But that's part of the outline. But an outline for a nonfiction book, we do need that. And for a novel, we need the synopsis. Now, the synopsis is much easier for me to take a 3-page synopsis, and look at that and go, okay, I either understand the story or I don't understand the story. And there are missing plot points here that we need to have. I can't find out where Act 2 ends and where Act 3 begins. That's much easier to work with than probably a nonfiction book, because to your point, like I said, a lot of times you don't get an outline with a nonfiction book. You just get the book. So
it's not that time consuming. I just take the headings. I'm not reading everything. I'm just taking chapter 1 title, cutting and pasting it, chapter 2, cutting and pasting chapter 3. And then later, as I'm reading, I'll put the minutia part in there, because then I do see, okay, 5 times. This has been reiterated 5 times, let's pick and choose where it goes. But go ahead. I cheat,
Yeah, so the other thing that a book doctor can help you with is adding color and clarity to your project. So, one of the things we're going to suggest, and I do this a lot, is add a personal story at the beginning, especially in nonfiction. If we're doing nonfiction, add a personal story or a professional story at the beginning of the chapter. Just for me, I'm a big believer in story. We've talked about this before, and I just believe that when you start a chapter with a story and there's a character involved and there's an adventure involved, some journey that's going forward, readers are much more engaged with that than they are just hearing information, right? So from a nonfiction standpoint, if you'll give me the start of a story, and what I say is, give me the start of the story, don't give me the whole story. Leave the story hanging, and then let's get into the information, and then let's close the story at the end. That way you kind of sandwich the information between it. I like to see nonfiction books in that way. That's just a personal preference, but I think it works. Somewhere in every chapter, I think it helps to have a story in there. It's just an anecdote of, this is how you can apply this, and you just get a story. So I'll recommend oftentimes that we add stories, a personal story, because it just does. The other thing is a humorous anecdote. If you have a humorous anecdote, sometimes that serves the same purpose as the story. People love to laugh, and if they've had 2 chapters of pretty heavy information, and you give them a chapter where there's a little bit of humor anecdote in it, people will smile and go, yeah, I can relate to that. I'm thinking of one of the projects I'm working on is where the grandmother went over to pick up a rock off the carpet, turned around and said, "Whose poop is this?" And the grandfather goes, "Well, it's not mine." It's not mine. Because they were keeping the grandkids, and one of them's 1 year old, and the dog runs out of the room. It's not mine. So just adding little things like that, that will enhance your book. And that's one of the things that we do as book doctors, is add those things. But you were going to say something a minute ago, and I kind of jumped in.
Oh, that's okay. No, that's fine. That's fine. Story. I was thinking of your book, the um, Father's Business. What's
Mhm.
the complete title of that?
My Father's Business.
My Father's Business, and it's devotionals on getting clarity and life direction for your life.
Right.
And I just murdered your subtitle, but
Right.
that's powerful little book. I love it because of the stories in there. Now you're telling stories of other people, but famous kind of people that we would know of, like Walt Disney. You use an example of dreaming and Walt Disney having a dream and seeing things before they were brought to life. And but I think the power of that is it's so powerful, and they're short little chapters, you know.
Yeah.
But
And
then
and that's easy enough to do. That's one of the reasons that I think stories work well, is because it's easy enough to write, to add a story based on another character, somebody famous. You don't have, so you're not having to dwell within yourself a story. You just go pick a character that gives you an example for the topic you're talking about. So yeah, talk about General Patton for somebody that doesn't give up. You talk about Disney for somebody that has the ability to dream. If that's the topic of the chapter, then just bring in a public character and talk about them and the
mhm,
story in a positive way. You don't want to defame anybody, but in a positive way. And the reader, because they know the individual, they go, "Yeah, that makes sense. I get that," or they should
well,
anyway.
I'm going to throw you a question then. What about permissions? Now, like, let's use the instance of Walt Disney's story in that book we just spoke about, My Father's Business. Did you make that up in your head, or did you,
No,
uh,
I don't think we have
how,
to worry much about permission for that these days, because you got Wikipedia. So as if somebody questioned whether that really happened, it's one of those things where if enough reliable sources have documented that it happened, then it may have probably happened. Um, there are things we learn all the time about what we thought to be true that might not be exactly true. And I'll use one example, like who knows if this is really true or not, but I just watched the Elvis movie. And there's an explanation in the movie of why the phrase "Elvis has left the building" became part of the catchphrase for Elvis. If you've ever heard
huh,
anybody, Elvis
yeah,
has left the building, because it's like a joke, right? Well, that's the end of the event. Everybody go home. Elvis has left the building. Well, in the movie, you kind of come to understand why that was said, right? And it was for security purposes, because
oh,
he had so much security to protect him that the public announcer, when he was finally out of the building, would make an announcement: Elvis has left the building. You can stand down now. There's no longer a threat. Who knows if that's
well,
true or
yeah,
not? Who knows, right? But it's in the movie. So that's something that you may or may not use. But the fact that Elvis was popular, and he died at this age, and he wore these flamboyant outfits, all that's documented. So you can use
right.
Elvis as somebody like that. Um,
Hmm.
the other thing,
Well, and
yeah, go
go
ahead.
ahead, go ahead. No, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say the other thing that a book doctor will often bring out is, what is the product that you're trying to sell? What are you really trying to, in this case, what are you trying to get across your main point, or what product are you trying to sell? What are the things that you want your readers to watch out for that maybe you haven't mentioned? I mean, you've been talking about all these things, but maybe you haven't talked about the adversaries that come against the reader, even if they subscribe to all this. So what's the benefits? What's the adversaries? What's the main thing you're trying to get across? All those come into play. Um, and I'll pause for a minute and let you pick up from there.
No, I love that. The benefits, the adversary. Um, I'm you just have me thinking about that in relation to my current client's work. Um, I like that. And that definitely helps with the sequential development of the thought. I think it's really important to keep your reader in mind. We constantly have to you just said sometimes if you've dealt with some heavy topics in the first 2 chapters, bring in some humor for your reader. And so in fiction, Eddie, how do you help the reader when you're book doctoring? You mentioned some of the things, but is there anything else?
Thank you for that. That's a good question. I love that. So one of the things I do really well, I'm not going to say it's a gift, just other people have said it seems to be a gift, and that is the ability to brainstorm a plot and pull it together. Doesn't mean you have to use what I give you, but I just seem to have the ability to take a story and twist it in certain ways that it's maybe different and unique. And so I love doing that. And I actually did that in 45 minutes last Friday night on the top porch with Selma and Benny. We were sitting up there. I was going to write on my own work, and I just had this idea for the story, and I ran with it. And in 45 minutes, I had 13 plot points. I had the whole story plotted out, and it's a love story, right? And anyway, so I've just got the ability to kind of do that from having worked in the structure. So I do that really well, and I enjoy doing that. And what I do with authors, or in this case, this is going to be a love story, and this is going to be ghostwritten, and because it's a love story, that's going to be the genre, and that's going to be the tone of the story. So we've talked about this. Love stories have loss at the end of the story. That's why they're love stories, is because there's personal loss. Right. And so even though I love writing humor, we have to be really careful about how much humor we use in the love story. Otherwise, it becomes satire and slapstick, right? And so what I was explaining to the author is we're only going to be able to use humor after there's a really deep down part of the story. In other words, when there's a serious thing that's happened that's really taken the reader into a dark place or a down place and left them, on tears or maybe crying. At that point, we can bring them back with humor, right? So we can do that in the story there, but we can't do too much humor because then it's going to be slapstick. And you don't want to have to use too much humor because that means you're also driving the reader down a lot of times, right? So it's one of those peaks and valleys, and that's how you would use humor, and that's what I coach on and when we're working on the manuscript. So even though somebody might give me 8 really funny life instances that happened with them, we may look at it and go, we can only really use 3. Let's save the other 5 for the next book you're going to work on. That kind of thing.
I have an anecdote about someone using humor to actually manipulate Hitler. It was part of his strategy. He used humor. He would deliver something tough and hard to the people, saying, this is going to be required of you. But then he would use humor to add levity to the situation, and it helped the hard, tough thing he was asking of them become more palatable, and their willingness increased to do the hard thing because of the insertion of humor. And so it was actually a tool that he specifically used. It was, and it was the way I learned about that was a pastor told me that he has seen pastors manipulate their audiences, their congregations, with the same tactic that Hitler used unknowingly. They're using that to manipulate and control their behaviors. And so he just, I was talking to this person about someone that had been hurt by the church, and he said, well, this is often a tool that
that's what that is one of the advantages that humor has. We've talked about it before. It's hard to be angry at somebody you've laughed with. It just is. So if you want to remain enemies, if you want to remain divided in a congregation, if you want to remain divided over politics, just make sure you don't get around people and share a laugh. Don't do that. Don't do that. And you'll continue to see them as the enemy, and and they'll continue to see you. But if you ever get around with them and start sharing a laugh together, careful, because you may find out they're not as mean as the demons that you think they are. That's just the advantage of. And Mark Twain did this. I was talking about this last night at our More Square Bible study. This is why Mark Twain came out with Tom Sawyer first, and Tom Sawyer was supposed to be a lighthearted adventure story with a little bit of romance with Becky Thatcher and all that. And it was so popular that Twain, because he was an abolitionist and didn't believe in slavery and was upset by what was going on with the slaves in this country, chose to take the success of Tom Sawyer and the humor that was in it and use that to launch Huckleberry Finn, which is really a story about slaves and releasing slaves into freedom and allowing us to see a slave as a person, not as property. That's the focus of Huckleberry Finn. And that's one of the reasons Mark Twain did it. He knew he could get away with it because of Tom Sawyer and because of everything else he had written. The humor would allow him to draw readers, and then they would see the hard truth of what slavery was being done in this country. Anyway, we're kind of down. We're a little bit.
And right there is the power of story. And in your conversation with Zena last week, you can use your influence in story to make changes in the world around us. And we have opportunities to do that. And she was encouraging, and that's kind of her thing, is to encourage people, write those stories. Let's make those changes, but use story to do it. And Mark Twain was really good at that. Yeah.
So that's part of this. Is kind of to wrap it up. This is kind of what book doctoring is, at least my understanding of it is. You take the patient, you put them out on the table, you don't give them any anesthesia. You open them up, you start cutting on them, you let them bleed, you got the nurses and everybody there to keep them from dying on the table. And then you stitch them back up and send them back, give them back to the family and go, here you go, they're fixed, or pretty close to fixed, and then you send them to the rehab and the general editor picks up from there. But the reality is that if you hire a good book doctor, they can take most manuscripts and make them almost publishable with enough time and effort. We're not completely rewriting. A lot of times we're just massaging things if we do it well.
Now you said almost publishable. Do you want to clarify that statement? Well,
I mean, there's no definition of what is publishable anymore. I mean, we can, the manuscript, a couple that I'm working on, I think they're could wind up being bestsellers, not because of my writing, just because of the life events that have happened in the author. And if we do the job well enough in a novel, I mean, it's the theme is pretty profound. I think it could make a huge impact. But there's no guarantee the book ever gets picked up.
Right.
So
yeah.
So that's why I wanted to say that is a book doctor can do a lot. And you may wind up with a really great story, but that doesn't mean anybody's going to pick it up. Why? If you don't have the platform, it's going to be hard. It's going to be hard to draw anybody. And that's one reason I started with the beginning of this. I love to write. So if I can ever partner with somebody that's got a huge platform, or speaker, or a pastor, somebody, and they got the platform but don't want to write it, find a ghostwriter or a book doctor, somebody that will ghostwrite the stuff for you, and just let you sell it. Let them split it. That's what ghostwriters do. They partner with the people with platform.
Right. Yeah. Well, Eddie, so there's no guarantees. That's what Eddie was saying. There's no guarantees that once we're done helping you doctor up your book and get it polished, or send it out to be polished, that you're going to end up with a book contract. There are just no guarantees in this industry at all. So many times I wished as an agent, people would ask me questions at conferences that I said, I just don't have that crystal ball. I can't say what will or will not do well in the market. I wish I had it. I would have been way more successful, but I didn't have a crystal ball. Nobody did. We can, it was very much when we're pitching our manuscripts and out there, it's a lot like gambling. Like you're just hoping your numbers get picked. You're just hoping it's matchmaking. The right editor meets the right manuscript and it's love.
Yeah.
And then that they can convince the money changers in the business to invest in you. So
Yeah, there is no guarantee, but the one thing you will have at the end of it, whether the book gets published or not, if the book doctor has done their job well, you will have a completed manuscript that you can look at and go, I remember how I wrote it. I see how it is now. These are the things I like. These are the things that I didn't know I needed, and now they're in there. So that's a learning process. And if you can, if we do our job well one time, and an author can go back and go, I can do this again. I know what to do now. I see in my own project now what I didn't see before. And now I can do this, and you begin to replicate it. That's worth the money in itself, because now you've got a model that you can replicate going forward. I say that because that's what Ron Benray and Al Gansky taught me. Those two taught me how to plot and what needs to go in a story. And once I learned that, I could do it. I might not be able to write all kinds of stories, but I know how to write the ones that I like writing, which is all I was trying to do.
Right. Yes. Yeah. Well, good. Let us know if there's anything and any other questions you have for Eddie or I on the type of editing, content editing, and book doctoring, if there's anything else. And also, just don't forget to like and subscribe. We really appreciate it. Make comments. It helps us reach more people, more writers to help. And that's what we're all about.
I think my closing comment would be, we've talked a lot today about book. The one thing I would also add is consider a book doctor for just your post, for your short stories, for your small things. If you've got a newsletter that's going out, consider a book doctor for that as well. It doesn't have to be a book. If you're putting anything before the public and you want to grow your following, grow your audience, and let them see that you're a writer and get better as a writer, let a book doctor come in behind you for a while and see if you can learn from them. And then once you figured out what they're doing and you go, I can do that, then cut them loose and run with it. I mean, that's a great use of a book doctor, is rather than put them on for the whole project, just put them on for 4 or 5 posts and see if they can make you better and funnier and have more impact. That's another good use of a book doctor. Well, this has been fun, Diana. We'll join next week. I think we're going to be talking about scenes and description. Is that right?
Yes, scenes and description. Have a good week, everybody.